the cycles of Genesis. In the figure of Abraham, we come to a figure of world importance. Now, whether he is an actual historical figure cannot be determined. That's why some people would argue that the cycles is where history begins, and some would argue that actually it isn't, that what can be considered history doesn't begin until the Exodus. With Abraham, or as he is originally called, Abram, shows us that the origin of the Hebrews is in the Babylonian city of Ur, which coincides with most of what we know about the Hebrews. He receives a call from a God who tells him to leave his homeland and to travel and to become a stranger in a strange land, to paraphrase later words, which he does. So he becomes the author of faith in one God, the father of monotheism. And of course, in doing so, he becomes the father of monotheism not only for Christians, but for Jews and for Muslims. All of them look to Abraham. And remember also that as you read the cycles of Abraham, that he physically becomes the father not only of Jews, according to the book of Genesis, but also according to the book of Genesis of the Arabs, who are actually the children of the firstborn, Ishmael. Now, if you read the Quran, it gives different stories. It interchanges characters somewhat. Who is it that Abraham is going to sacrifice? Is it Isaac, as the Hebrew Bible says, or is it Ishmael, as the Quran seems to indicate? Told from a different point of view. These cycles repeat themselves. We have the story of Isaac. Isaac is a very weak character, not only physically, but a weak character from a literary point of view. Jacob is the deceiver, who ironically, time after time, is the one who is deceived. He is deceived in terms of working for his wife. He wants Rachel for a wife, but her father, his uncle, substitutes Leah on the wedding night, and apparently Jacob had a little too much to drink, and when he wakes up in the morning having consummated the marriage, it's Leah there, who is doe-eyed, as the Hebrew says, rather than Rachel, and he is forced to work for her for another 7 years, which to him seems like a day. How romantic, especially Valentine's. Story of Joseph, though, so Jacob is deceived by his sons. They sell Joseph into slavery. They tell the father he's dead. So we feel sorry for the figure of Joseph, but the rabbis would say what goes around comes around. These stories are filled with insights into ancient Hebrew beliefs. In the story of Lot, we found the origin of the nations of Ammon and Moab, which border Israel, to which the Hebrews are related but enemies, and we find out that they are the result of an incestuous union. Take it for what it's worth. This is how the Israelites viewed them. This is their heritage. One of the interesting stories is the story of Judah and Tamar. Tamar is married to one of Judah's sons who dies, and in accordance with Levirate law, she then becomes the wife of his brother. Now, this law, which is established in the book of Leviticus, not till after Genesis, says that no name shall pass out of existence in Israel, so that if a husband dies without an heir, then his wife is to marry his nearest male relative, who is then to father a child in the name of the dead husband. Well, in the story of Tamar, well, the next son is Onan. Onan apparently wants this cake but doesn't want to eat it. And knowing that this child, even though it's his, will technically not be his, but he will be responsible for it, as well as being responsible for Tamar, he practices birth control. The book of Genesis says literally that he spilled his seed upon the ground. This has nothing to do with masturbation. It has to do with what we call coitus interruptus. He withdrew before he ejaculated, and therefore he spilled his seed. And God kills him. Why does he kill him? Not for masturbating, that's not what he's been doing. He kills him because he doesn't fulfill his duty. Well, of course, Judah doesn't want to give another son to this unlucky woman, and so hesitates, saying that the next son is too young. So after a while, Tamar takes things into her own hands, literally. She dresses as a prostitute. She seduces Judah. And then when Judah, of course, gets up, he finds that she's gone, or rather when he comes back to bring her payment, that she's gone, and his signet ring and his staff are gone too. So later when he hears that Tamar is pregnant, he's going to have her stoned in accordance with the law. And she produces the signet ring and staff. And when Judah sees that, he says, hey, you were in the right and I'm in the wrong. And therefore he recognizes that he has not fulfilled his duty and that Tamar has forced him to become righteous. And so Tamar becomes a heroine in that sense, making Judah fulfill the law. So, very interesting stories, particularly the story of Joseph, which tells of how the Israelites, the descendants of Jacob, moved down into Egypt, where they are when the book of Exodus begins, and they have become slaves under a new Pharaoh who doesn't know who Joseph was. But that's coming next week, and we'll talk about that then.